I think the Apple II had 48K of memory. And like the top 16K was also like the video buffer.
And now your data engineers are asking for a computer with 64 gig of
now I need to have a bunch of NVIDIA cards someplace powered by a nuclear power plant, for us to answer a prompt. So the world changed a bit. Universities were experimenting with it. They had computer science departments, but I looked at it and I went, I already know how to code. Why would I go do that for 4 years? So I went to the engineering program. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering. I'm terrible at that, by the way. I electrocuted myself many times in those labs. I would not use me to do any of that work. We had some of the worst office space in Medellín. For a while, we literally rent a building in Patio Bonito where they put us in the garage. Okay. So we were sitting on plastic chairs on concrete. And I remember telling people the mythology of a garage startup is not so good when you're actually in the garage.
There's a cultural big change and misconception in Colombia, because in Colombia there is a saying that the clients always have the reason.
Look, I believe client service is an important part of what we do, and I try to instill that in everybody at Source, that that's part of why we're here. But I'll look at someone's resume and say, okay, so they did these things, but what do I really want in someone that we bring into Source? If we don't hear in the interview a lifelong love of learning, we don't make an offer to that guy.
Es la hora del tech. Prepara tu bebida favorita y disfruta de este viaje donde vamos más allá del código y los datos.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to La Hora del Tech. As you might have noticed, this episode is in English. First of all, sorry for broken English, but we couldn't miss the opportunity to be here with a great person, a big leader, serial entrepreneur, mentor, and everything. So I'm glad to introduce you to Mike Hoey.
Thanks, Sebastian.
Yeah, sure. I'm here with Hugo, our special guest every time. But yeah, we're so happy to talk about here why it's so special to create a nearshoring Colombia. How has been your journey here? Not just here, but also in all your career. You have a couple of years working in tech, so it'll be so inspiring for us to hear that. And welcome, everybody. Welcome, Hugo.
Oh, thanks for having me. And again, apologies for my Chipchombian English. And so we're going to be here, in kind of an interview, but with Mike is more like a conversation about a very inspiring leader, and then I know that everybody wants to know a little bit more about him, so we're excited to be here.
Thanks for having me on the podcast. What do we want to talk about today? What do you want to know?
Well, so first of all, a couple minutes ago when we were warming up for this podcast, I just asked you, hey, do you actually code? And you almost killed me, right? But that was because for the 2.5 years that I have met you, I have always seen you as a leader and just taking care of everything, like more on a leadership role and everything. And you never mess around. But this is not something that happened over the night. This is a journey that you have gone through, and you have a lot of entrepreneurs before, so a lot of companies. So how did that start? What is Mike? Why are you here?
So let me go all the way back to the beginning, since you were asking if I knew how to code. So I taught myself how to code when I was 8 or 9 years old. Computers always fascinated me, and this was in like 1975. So it was early days of this stuff. So I could get some time on mainframe systems and mess around a little bit. Our school had like a Commodore PET and some TRS-80s that I would try to learn how to code on. And then at one point, my parents got me an Apple II when those first came out. And then I finally had something I could work on all the time, not just like an hour here and there after school. And I used to get these magazines, Creative Computing, Soft Side, things that are long gone in this world. And they would print programs in the pages for computers that you didn't own. And I would type these things in, and they were always for some different variant of BASIC. And so I'd have to type them in and then fix them, because they would have commands that the Apple didn't have, and so they wouldn't work. And then you had to figure out how to make it work. So that's how I learned how to do this. And BASIC was a weird language. Like you wouldn't recognize it today. Like it had line numbers, and you do like go-to jumps to different parts. And I think the Apple II had 48K of memory.
Okay.
Right. So and like the top 16K was also like the video buffer. So if you wrote a program that was too big, if you turn on the screen, like you would blow the top of the program off.
And now your data engineers are asking for computer with 64 gig.
Now I need to have a bunch of NVIDIA cards someplace powered by a nuclear power plant, for us to answer a prompt. So the world changed a bit.
Are you familiar with AI?
Teeny bit. Been taking a crash course lately. So I did that all through high school, and when I went to college, computer science wasn't, in my mind, a very well established degree program back then. Universities were experimenting with it. They had computer science departments, but I looked at it and I went, I already know how to code. Why would I go do that for 4 years? So I went into the engineering program. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering. I'm terrible at that, by the way. I electrocuted myself many times in those labs, and I would not use me to do any of that work. But it was highly technical. It was a lot of math. It appealed to me as for really a course load about problem solving and applied mathematics to that. So that served me very well. We were talking before, when I was in grad school, Syracuse had a computing center that the state put there for parallel architecture computers. So my master's thesis was written on a connection machine, which was an early parallel architecture computer. It had 64,000 one-bit processors. Wow. And so you had to learn how to take your problem and turn it into something that a parallel solution could solve, which was a different way of thinking about these things. And I had a 3-day class there hosted by Thinking Machines. And, I'm like scratching my memory to try to see if I would have met Richard Feynman in that class, who's a personal hero of mine. He worked at Thinking Machines back then, although I didn't know that. But I had a 3-day class on how to think about problems that could be solved in parallel. So, all the things we do now in Spark, all go back to those early days on how to do things. And my first startup, ESPS, we were doing we had to create 500,000 page documents, right? And if you try to use like Word to do anything over a few hundred pages, like it was always trying to figure out new page boundaries, so it would run out of memory and die. So we had money from Adobe Systems for this file format that had version 1.0 of Acrobat.
Yeah, but hold on a bit. So you say your first entrepreneur or your first startup, but do you start with a startup or you first go with a regular job?
So I paid my way through college by writing code for people back in Pennsylvania. So I built a couple of systems that I charged not enough money for when looking back on it, but good for a college kid. I took some of the money from that and I was selling travel agency software because my family had a travel agency and I built all the software that ran that place. So I was an entrepreneur from early days. When I was getting out of school, I remember I had 3 job offers. So I had a job offer from, there was a electrical engineering type thing working for IBM up in Burlington, Vermont at a chip factory they had up there. I had an offer from AT&T, who was more of a manufacturing company before they became just a telecom company, working in one of, being a line engineer for them, which is in theory what I trained for. And then I met this guy from what was then called Anderson Consulting, a guy named Dick Sullivan, who was starting a technology practice in Philadelphia. And he made the worst offer monetarily from all of those. I think his offer was 30% below everyone else's offer. And I took that job because I said I wanted to work with Dick Sullivan and I wanted to go be a part of what he was doing there. So I wound up in consulting. Okay. And I was a weird little outlier there. Like I came in there with all these technical degrees, and I was, I remember working with Amy Loftus was in my start group, who you've met. And Amy runs Slalom now, are a huge part of that. And, she was a liberal arts major from Bryn Mawr College. And she's like, what am I doing here next to this guy with a master's in electrical engineering? And we're all trying to learn COBOL together. And, because that's what you did when you started with the firm. And so I met all these interesting people that are still in my life today at that place. And, we were talking about this last night, and, part of the magic of that was, Dick Sullivan as a leader built this community in Philadelphia that I don't think had been done before. And all the people I worked with back then, I'm still in touch with now in one way or another. My good friend Dan Ressler is a partner at Deloitte. Tom Schwanger runs operations for Viva Systems. Amy is high up in Solemn. Chrissy Howard, who's a client of ours now, is running technology for Intoxilock. My friend Wendy runs TechSmith. I go on and on. Like everyone I worked with there, is doing great things in the area, and they're leaders in the field, and we all keep in touch.
How do you think that relationship impacted your life? Like sometimes when you're in an environment where you have a lot of entrepreneurs around, and even though you didn't know that back then, how do you think that impacted you?
So, I think some of the entrepreneurship, I learned from a couple early people. So my mother's always been very entrepreneurial. She's always, when I was growing up, she was one of like 5 women that worked at a steel mill nearby, which made her someone that you could not trifle with. That's an interesting, challenging environment. But she started a travel agency in '86, and the travel industry went through 3 or 4 shakeups, and that place ran through them all. She created a unique model. She built a great business. People stayed with her for 30 years. And it never occurred to her to go back into industry and do anything like that. I worked with a guy who was one of the IntelliSophic people, George Birch. He was always a hardcore entrepreneur. And I remember I would see him, he was a friend of my father's, and I would see him sometimes living in a penthouse and other times in a sleeping bag in a cabin, right? So he had these boom and bust cycles in his life, and he was always trying to do something interesting, and he was always pushing there. And he was pretty inspiring to me on that. I remember being in his office once in D.C., and he had some simulation running on his computer, and I said, "What's going on here?" And he's like, "Oh, it's a simulation of a sub trying to get away from a boat on the surface that's trying to attack it."
What?
And he was, this was like probably in like the mid '80s. He was essentially running, some military simulation, working for the government. And he's done all sorts of interesting things in his life, and is a good inspiration for entrepreneurship. I stayed with Accenture for about 5 years. So I was working for Dick Sullivan. I was working for a guy named Tom Spann, who I learned a lot about the business side of how consulting works, of how client relationships work. And I still try to keep in touch with Tom. Every year or two, we wind up chatting about a few things. When I left there, I had an opportunity to go to a startup. It's a company called ESPS that's now called Liquent, and Liquent's still around. So I was there probably in like 95, 96. It was a 8-person company. I was transitioning from being an early client, and they asked me to come in and run technology there. It was an interesting first day. The founders had a fight with the bankers. So like I literally got there, and the CEO tells me, it's like, "Hey, just so you know, we fired the founders last night."
Okay.
We fired the founders.
Did you know?
Yeah, like they just had a fight. It's like, "You're out." And I'm like, all right. So I was worried about how I'd sort of manage the relationship with that guy running tech, but I guess that's not a problem now. Let me see how many people were going to quit. And I come in there, and there was a guy that worked at GE who was running QA there. Some of you have met, named Bob Schatz. He runs an agile consulting practice now. Mm-hmm. And when I told him I was coming in there, he gave me a hug because he thought, it's like, I left GE for this, and now the guy that brought me here got fired, and oh crap, how am I going to pay my mortgage? And then I go out and sort of tell everyone, it's like, hey, I took this job. We're going to be working together. 2 guys got up and left.
Wow.
So I'm like, "Bob, were those guys important?" He's like, "It'll be fine. Keep going."
So, Mike, if some sort of a conclusion on your when you started your career, we could say that you being raised by, in the entrepreneurship world that, build your confidence of, I don't need to work for somebody, or I can work for somebody for a while, but I can do things by myself too?
So there's if you read about how people become entrepreneurs, there's one thing in common, is that they get to a point where no one will hire them.
They become unemployable.
They become unemployable, and so you have to figure out how to make something work because no one else is going to pay you to come into the office. I've had that conversation with Mark Brasso, who's one of our long-term clients and a good friend of mine. He said he became unemployable, so he had to go start a business in his basement.
So when you say become unemployable, it's because you do many things that it is hard to put you in, on a single spot and give you like a specific task?
I'm not sure why I'm unemployable. I just figured out that I was.
You thought you were.
And it hit me on one day. Like I remember, I was, I've been doing some of the IntelliSophic stuff, and we had people that were editors. So I was running a bit of a curation shop, and we were building technology. And I had an interview for a job where the company needed someone to run an editorial group and build technology. And I did the interview, and I'm like, man, I crushed that. I'm definitely getting this. And the recruiter calls me back and said, yeah, he's definitely not going to hire you. He won't let anyone who's ever run his own business in his shop. And I'm like, crap. I got to go figure out how to make money a different way. Because if this job I couldn't get, I'm toast.
Okay, so you went through different interviews. You didn't get the job, so you thought, okay, I need to, find my way.
Guess I better figure out how to start selling stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
and that's a common thread in entrepreneurship stories. I was helping my son in an entrepreneurship class. It was during COVID, so we were doing it together, in the kitchen. And that was the first chapter. I'm like, that's not right. And then I started telling stories. I'm like, oh, yeah, that is right. And then I called Mark, and he's like, yeah, that's what happens. Yeah.
There's patterns.
And you think learning how to sell is a big thing when you are trying to be an entrepreneur?
It's not learning how to sell. It's, I don't think of what I do as selling. I'm trying to understand people's problems and then figure out if together we can go solve them. And, I think of it more about, sort of building trust with someone that you're meeting and saying, okay, here's what we do. This is what you do. Let's see if there's synergies here. And not all these conversations turn into projects. We do these sometimes, and we'll have 4 or 5 conversations. We go, all right, we're going to go our separate ways. But if you can build that trust and get that rapport, it's not selling. It's someone says, okay, we're ready to go do this. What does this look like if you're helping us? And that's how all these projects all actually start. That's just how I think about it.
Okay, so I understand that the way you see clients are more clients' needs first, and probably that's how you end up with all your clients being referrals, right?
I think so, and that was something I learned working for Accenture. So Accenture had some core values, and one of them was client service. Right? We're there to take care of our clients. We're supposed to be good stewards of their money. We're supposed to make sure we're delivering what they need. And there's a hard delivery focus there. The client service part, and then internally, a lot of the firm's culture was about building up everybody else in the firm. Helping everyone else continue to get better. And if you look at a lot of the things that we try to build Source on, a lot of it goes back to that time I spent at Accenture and how they focus on clients and how they focus on their own people, and what those values were. It's how I try to inform everything.
Okay, and now that you come to Source Meridian, so that brings us to the point where we start the conversation. Why did you choose Colombia to create a nearshore?
So I'd love to have a better story for this. I sat in my office with a giant map of the world and then tried to go figure this out. It's not at all what happened.
So you didn't think of it?
No. Sort of going with a web of relationships. I was working on a project. This is a IntelliSophic era project, and I needed to scale up. I needed some developers to help me, and I had a couple people that worked for me back in the early 2000s. One of them was Michael Puskar, and Michael had started a outsourcing company in China at the time. So I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, I need some help. I need some developers. Can you help me out on a project?" And I was not looking forward to dealing with the time zone difference in China. Like that means you're like up at 1 a.m. to have meetings and crap like that. But I was like, all right, Michael's the guy I know. Let me ask him. And he said, I can totally help you, but we're not going to do it in China. You're going to come down to Colombia. And I'm going to, I'll spin up a couple people on a project for you, but, I want you to come down and see this place. So there I am. This is probably like 2012. Getting ready to come to Colombia for my first time, and all I have in my head is like all the nonsense that Americans think about Colombia. So
you were afraid.
I was a little nervous about it. I was excited for the adventure, and I had all wrong stuff in my head.
So you came to a safari.
No, I thought it was going to be a shooting gallery, but of course it wasn't, right? I come and and Medellín is this beautiful city, and I meet all these wonderful people, and I had my eyes open to what a wonderful place this was. Just 6-hour flight from Philadelphia, and I got through that week, and I said, okay, this was important, and for me, building software is being with people building software. Like that's my lifelong love is building software, and I want to work with those teams. So, the company I was working for then had next to no money, so I could only fly down like every 3 months, and spend a little time here. And then, as that project kind of wound down, and I started Source Meridian after that, I started coming down once a month, and I would stay for a week. And then, at one point, I stayed for 2 weeks. I had to figure out like what the weekends were like here, and how to wash my own clothes, which, by the way, is really hard with a Spanish language washer dryer that shortens the name of everything so they fit on the buttons. I definitely put all my clothes in the dryer, threw soap in, and turned it on and watched it tumble around.
That's at least just the washing machine, but you do the short words with everything. You Americans do short words with everything.
This is the first time it came back at me.
Yeah.
That was good. It was our vengeance.
It was an amusing day. But I started coming here more and more, and if you talk to some of the people that have been with me for a long time, and we had some of the worst office space in Medellín. For a while, we literally were in a building in Patio Bonito where they put us in the garage. Okay. So we were sitting on plastic chairs on concrete, and I remember telling people like, the mythology of a garage startup is not so good when you're actually in the garage. That was. I think that's a burger joint now.
No, oh, is it? Is that place?
Yeah.
Okay. Just for the audience to know, this is Medellín, Poblado, Patio Bonito.
Yep.
Okay.
How do you say Poblado?
Poblado.
Poblado. You got to really pull out the
Yeah. To be with the flow.
Yeah. Poblado.
So the way I got here was happenstance, right? It was a friend of mine was here, invited me down. What became necessity was when that project ended. I built a great team and I didn't want to lose them. So I said, okay, well, I better figure out how to sell some new projects. And I sold some of the clients that we still have today, right? So I had a bunch of crummy clients because I didn't know any better, and I didn't know how to price anything. I was making just enough to cover payroll, which is all I was trying to do. I just wanted to keep everyone together. But we wound up signing ThoroughCare around then, and then we started working with Purple Lab, and we started working with IntegraChain. And I think getting IntegraChain as sort of like the third good client, I then went and fired all the old bad clients.
So that's an important milestone when you can fire bad clients.
I think so, and I've built other businesses, and to me, being able to say no to a client, when they're clients sometimes get confused about the power relationship there because they're paying you. They think they can make you do anything that they want. And if you're trying to make the next payroll, sometimes you just have to just take it. Mm-hmm. We got to the point where we weren't just trying to get to the next payroll. So you can start to say, look, this company has values. We'll do this. We won't do that. And you're able to say no to a client, and you're able to also, like, if you can't correct a client's behavior, you can fire a client and say, you know what, we're not going to work here anymore. And I fired lots of clients. It's always the best day when you do it.
There's a cultural, big, change and misconception in Colombia, because in Colombia there is a saying that says that the clients always have the reason. So, what do you think about it?
So, look, I believe client service is an important part of what we do, and I try to instill that in everybody at Source, that that's part of why we're here. But clients can ask you to do things that are wrong, and you need to be able to say no. And relationships can get twisted and toxic, and you need to be able to walk away.
And actually, we always tend to do like comparison with real life and business and technology. And that's not just for business. Saying how to say no or learning how to say no is pretty important in every kind of relationship.
I 100% agree with you. So we were talking about some of the people that I learned from in my career. When I was at ESPS, I worked with a guy named Jeff Sager. He ran sales there. And Jeff taught me, if I know anything about sales, I learned it from Jeff. And one of the things he taught me is, say no.
You said sales are important, yeah?
He said, say no and see what happens. Don't just keep agreeing to everything the client wants. Sometimes the clients want you to say no. They want to know where the boundaries are. The other thing he said is, don't forget to ask for the money. He said, people forget that. He said, it seems like a simple thing, but if you don't, ask for the money, then the deal never happens and the client just keeps talking. But the say no part, when I get frustrated with salespeople that I interact with today, I always think it's like, you need to learn how to say no.
So one of the things that, amazes me the most about Mike is when it comes to people, so Mike is, very like welcoming, charming, very nice. When it comes to business, I won't say it's not that way too, but it becomes like more binary. So Mike is like a yes
binary?
Or no,
Okay.
yeah, like one or zero. So this is black and white, and then there is no like in the middle points is just yes or no, and then that amazes me because it's somehow something that you learn that it weren't part of you, and then you learn and then apply.
I think that's just doing this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of pattern match and you go, okay, there's some things that are worth a long discussion. Some things are just, we'll do this, we won't do that. And it gets binary because you know that if you go the other way, you're just going to cause a whole bunch of problems. I think that's just doing this for a long time. You get that pattern matching type ability.
And Mike, what is something that you see in Colombia that you don't see in the States, for example? Because you say, hey, I found here a lot of great people to work with, and you say, I don't want to miss them, I don't want to lose them. So why?
So what's different from here from the States? So I've run dev shops in the States. So ESPS was probably the biggest one, had about 50 people towards the end. But that was development shop for a software company, and actually it had a lot of different cultures in there, right? We had a wave of Russian immigration at the time, so we had all these people that were off the boat from the Soviet Union breaking up, and and we had the normal guys that are in Pennsylvania, and a couple crazy PhDs and stuff working around. I don't know that part feels that different when I'm here. I think what I like about being in Colombia and working with developers here, when I first got here, like if you were a software guy, you worked at a bank,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
It has to be the worst job in the world. And when we started talking to people about, hey, we're going to go build, web-based software, we're going to do all these cool things, like everyone was so hungry to go do that. And they would throw themselves into the projects. And we were trying to figure things out for the first time. And by the way, we're living through a crazy time in computer science where, every 5 years this industry turns upside down. and you need people that, see that as an interesting challenge, that they want to keep learning, they want to keep doing this, and they want those new things to keep happening. And I find that here.
That's awesome. I remember that during that time there was a new JavaScript framework every 2 weeks.
Yeah, no,
It was a time.
It was nuts, and it's moving even faster right now. And if you talk to how we recruit people, talk to our recruiters, like the things that we look for, I'll look at someone's resume and say, okay, so they did these things, but what do I really want in someone that we bring into Source? If we don't hear in the interview a lifelong love of learning, we don't make an offer to that guy. Everyone we hire has to show that they want to keep learning new things.
You're giving away tricks, Mike.
It's not a trick.
Yeah.
You have to be able to talk about it from experience. And,
Yeah, that's true.
And I remember like we had someone that we hired and, he didn't work out in the company. And I remember saying like, I feel like his mom told him to go into computer science because it would be a good job. And he had no love of it. He had no passion for it. He was just, hitting the keys. I'm like, we can't have that here.
Actually, one of the things that we do at Source that is, very different from other companies, and I'd say, and even, other industries is our recruitment process, all the different interviews we have. So normally in the industry is like the technical test first. Mm-hmm. So if you pass it, then you go to the, cultural fit and the rest of the things. At Source, we do
we do it the other way.
Yeah, we do it the other way. First, the cultural fit. And I've been, I've been asked for, why we do that, and then something that we care about at Source, it's actual human beings, who you are as a person and the passion you have for technology. Because we move from one technology to other, we are very agnostic, and then we don't care if this is Python or Rust or JavaScript. As long as you have passion, you're able to move.
Yep. Yeah, the lifelong love of learning and. Yeah, that passion for this. I want to have people around me that want to be here, that are trying to, that want to go do new things, that want to, really deliver great stuff. So I was told early on, like in an interview, you're really trying to figure out two things. And we break this up in lots of ways, but it's, can the person do the work, and then do you want to work with them? Okay. And there's lots of people that can do the work. There aren't a lot of people that we want to work with. And so that's why we do that way. So we had a time when we had to hire a bunch of people really fast for the slalom stuff. And we needed seniors, and we needed them yesterday. And we didn't spend enough time on the cultural fit. And when those projects wound down, only one of those guys stayed. Everyone else, either by themselves or by us asking them to, wound up leaving the company. So that's what happens when you don't care about cultural fit, because you just need someone right away.
And speaking about culture, so all of this, like having this kind of, process designed this way for, interviews, recruitment, even, internal processes, that requires an investment, because you need time, you need to build trust and all of these things. So you think it's worth it, investing in culture in companies like this?
It's what we're here for. Look, you can walk across the street from the office and get a job at 5 different dev shops. We want to be the one that you actually want to stay at, and that comes from building the culture, investing in the culture, and making it a place that people want to go work at. Otherwise, okay, we can go be global and be a bunch of mercenaries and pay for guys to come in. And that's a business. I mean, people do that. They're big. They make lots of money. I'm sure they're happy in their own way. It's just not a place I'd ever want to work. And I don't want to build a place that I wouldn't want to work in.
And you got that mindset kind of, partially because of what, who you are internally, and then your mentors and leaders that inspired you in your career.
It's people that inspired me in my career. I said a lot of what I tried to do at Source is really informed from my early days at Accenture. And how they thought about it. And like Accenture is a very different place now. They went public. They're global. They don't do the same things that we did back then. But back then, a lot of the work they did was building huge software projects for companies, and they cared a lot about building up their own people. And one of my favorite things from being there is if you weren't good at something, if you were nervous about it, that's what you were doing next. they did not let you say like, hey, this isn't my thing. Just keep me over here. It's like, nope. You had to do that. I remember being, like anyone in like their early 20s, I was nervous about public speaking. And they said, okay, well, then you're going to do the next 3 presentations. And I think like 6 months later, I was in one of like the biggest auditoriums in Philadelphia, like giving a talk in front of the entire company. And I remember telling my dad about that. He's like, Yeah, I saw Bob Dole give a speech there, who was like a guy that ran for president.
Wow.
It's like, I just had to like, take the whole room in. And it's like I even had to go tell a joke. Like it was, but the firm had made me keep doing things that I wasn't comfortable with, getting me out of my comfort zone and saying, you can do this. You just need to have the experience. And, we try to do that at Source. That's why we try to put people in challenging projects, things that'll make them stretch, make them grow, because you don't know what you can do until you have to go do it.
Yeah, I remember, for example, a training that we had at Source Meridian where the guy that was giving training say, you have to love people so they can be good at, not love them because they are good at something. And I think that's the base of all this conversation. And just kind of to finish the conversation, I'd like you to share with the audience, what are the biggest challenges that you have working here in Colombia?
Working here in Colombia? So I have an interesting history of working here in Colombia. It's a little easier now that the company's bigger and I have a little more success. So I have a nice apartment. All my stuff's here. It's easy to travel. Early days, I remember I would stay in these terrible, dreadful apartments. And I was telling Hugo about this last night. Like I stayed in a place in Poblado where I could put my arms out and touch all the walls.
It had no windows.
That was in Envigado. I stayed in a place in Envigado, and I got in the room, and I'm like, what's wrong with this room? It had no windows. It was just a big piece of concrete with a bed in it. So early days, it was a little rougher because, the business wasn't really making any money. So I would take these like airlines you've never heard of, come in at 1 a.m. and stay in crummy places. The challenges of working here. So like I love learning the culture. To me, that's an interesting puzzle to solve. And understanding, how, what makes people tick. What are the things that everyone loves doing? What are the things they won't do? The difference between, Paisas in Medellín and the Rolos in Bogota. And I've got that interesting challenge now. Like we just opened up an office in Quito, and I'm trying to figure out like, okay, how are Ecuadorians different from Colombians? What are the ways that this is going to be a different experience for us, and how do we make the best of this and make a new home for Source down there with totally different in a totally different culture. So I don't know if that makes it hard. It makes it interesting. I've come to realize that I'm never going to understand all the paperwork involved in Latin America, so I try to surround myself with people that just make it all go away. I did have an experience. We were trying to go to a race like a few months ago, and Bill Ferry and myself, like we'd lost our entrance passes, and the other Americans we were with were like, "Oh, just come in, like they won't check." And I'm like, "You don't understand this place. Like that guy's a volunteer. He will check. And if I have a fight with him, it's going to go to that cop over there. If I have a fight with that guy, it's going to go to that army guy over there." And it's like, we're just not getting in. I don't have the paperwork. Like that's Latin America. And we're in the States. You can try to sort of talk your way through all that stuff.
Yeah. That's who we are. Yeah. You're right about it.
So it doesn't make it hard. It's different. And I have to kind of calibrate, my behaviors when I'm here different from what I would do in the States.
Great. Okay, nice. So it was pretty cool to have you here. So it was probably the first time, hopefully not the last one. I know the audience have a lot more to talk about, but we're so blessed. We have a lot of openings in Source Meridian. You give them a couple tips to pass through the interviews, but that's okay because, that's the kind of people we want to work with. So thank you, everyone, for seeing this episode. So if you like it, comment on the Apple or whatever, Spotify, wherever you're listening to this, YouTube. So remember that we always love to hear what you want to hear next, who you want us to talk with. And of course, if you had questions for Mike, for us, for everyone, so just go ahead. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, Sebastian. It was a lot of fun. Happy to do it again.
Thanks.